I don't really care how skilled you are in your field. If you don't get people, all that talent is pretty much wasted. This is something Robert Greene gets, too. Today, I'm gonna break down another one of Robert Greene's books, The Laws of Human Nature. Now, I get it, some people aren't exactly fans of his work. They think his books are dark or even a bit sketchy. Honestly, I think that's because Robert isn't afraid to dive into the murky waters of human nature, the stuff most of us prefer to ignore or pretend doesn't exist. But here's the thing, getting a handle on yourself and the people around you? It's one of the most crucial skills you can have. We're all surrounded by people, right? We interact with them every single day. Yet, a lot of us are terrible at this skill. I've seen some seriously talented folks lose their jobs or run into trouble just because they weren't great at dealing with people. This video goes over 18 laws, and I'm pretty sure it'll help you level up your people skills. Oh, and by the way, this is one of the longest videos I've ever done, so you might want to save it and come back later if you can't watch the whole thing in one go. Alright, let's dive in. Law number 1, the Law of Envy. So, my first gig was selling shoes at this tiny store. My manager? Yeah, she was one of those envious types who'd talk smack about everyone behind their backs. She'd also give me these fake compliments that felt more like insults. Her jokes? They were the kind that made everyone squirm, like she was laughing at us on the sly. When I finally landed a better job and left after a few months, it was such a relief. But get this, that same week, I bumped into an old coworker, and he asked me if it was true that I got fired for stealing from the cash register. I was like, what? Turns out, the manager had spread a bunch of lies about me. Now, whether you admit it or not, you probably compare yourself to others. Some people use that comparison to push themselves harder, but others? They let it fester into envy and jealousy. Most people won't go out of their way to act on that envy, but if someone's trash talking you or trying to mess with you, you're probably dealing with someone who's got a serious case of envy. The signs of envy are pretty obvious. If you want to test someone, share some good news about yourself and watch how they react, especially their eyes. Even if their words are all supportive, their eyes might be telling a different story. You can flip the script, too. Tell them something bad that's happened to you, and see if you catch a tiny flash of happiness on their face. Just like my old manager, envious people can make you feel uncomfortable and mocked, even when they're pretending to be nice. Gossip is another dead giveaway of envy. Seriously, steer clear of envious people. Nothing good ever comes from hanging around them. But if you're stuck with one, try to deflect their envy. To do that, don't show off. Keep the details of your life to yourself, and always try to shift the spotlight away from you. Surround yourself with people who genuinely celebrate your wins and bring good vibes into your life. And when you catch yourself feeling envious of someone, remind yourself that you're only seeing part of the picture. Other people's lives are just as complicated as yours, with their own ups and downs. Try practicing feeling happy for others so you can turn that envy into something more positive, like inspiration or admiration. Law number 2, the Law of Role-Playing. So, a few months back, a buddy of mine hit me up for some help. He's been in a long-term relationship with this French girl and was ready to pop the question. But he had this big worry. I'm gonna have to go to Paris and meet her parents, he said. Her dad's a tough guy, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't like me. My friend was planning to gather some intel on his future father-in-law, and he wanted my help to practice some tricky conversations so the whole thing would go as smoothly as possible. I'm sure you can relate to wanting to put your best foot forward. Maybe it was for a big work meeting, a job interview, or even just a family gathering. We almost never show the world exactly who we are deep down. It's like we're all actors, wearing a different mask for each situation in our lives. We're one person at work, another with our family, and maybe even someone else with our friends. Why do we do this? Well, it's because we need to get along with people, and being totally open about all our feelings and traits would probably make things awkward, if not impossible. Someone who always says exactly what's on their mind? Yeah, they're not going to be the most popular person around. They might even be outright disliked. If you're lucky, You can be more real in close relationships, but for most social situations, especially at work, that's just not how it works. If you ignore this law, you're missing out on a big chance to sharpen your social skills. Here are 2 tips to help you make the most of this. Tip number 1. Accept that these masks are necessary for you to function in society, and wear yours with confidence. You're not being fake, you're just doing what's expected. Tip number 2. Even though our masks are pretty good, there are tiny cracks where our true selves sneak out sometimes. You can pick up on this by watching people closely. Kids are masters at this, they're awesome at noticing things, which is why liars hate being around them. All you have to do is tap into that same ability. Pay attention to people's faces, their micro-expressions, the way they tense up, or how their smiles don't quite reach their eyes. Listen to the way their voice sounds, whether it's too fast, too slow, or just a little off. Just don't make it too obvious, or they might get defensive. Law number 3, the law of compulsive behavior. Do you have a friend who's always falling for the wrong person? They swear up and down that next time will be different, but a few months later, they're heartbroken again. I used to have a friend who kept offending people without meaning to. He'd always feel bad and apologize, but sure enough, he'd do it again later on. Our behavior patterns are shaped by a deep part of our personality called character. Character sticks with us our whole lives, so it's easier to spot when you look at someone's actions over time. Remember, people don't just do things once. They repeat their behavior, good and bad, sometimes without even realizing it until it's too late. Alright, let's dive into how you can use your understanding of character to make your relationships better. Tip number 1, keep an eye on people's behavior patterns. How do they make decisions? How do they handle problems? But most importantly, how do they react when they're under pressure or holding some level of power? People tend to show their true selves when they're stressed out. That's when their real character comes through, and you can see what they're really made of. Tip number 2, make character your top priority when choosing who to hang out with. When you're picking a partner, for example, character should outweigh things like charm or how attractive they are. This is the key to avoiding wasted years in a toxic relationship with someone who isn't a good match for you. Aim to be around people who are strong, adaptable, empathetic, and persistent. Tip number 3, steer clear of toxic character types. Here's a rundown of some personality types you should watch out for. The hyper-perfectionist, they seem dedicated, but they're more about controlling every little detail than actually getting good results. The relentless rebel, these folks hate rules and authority, and they can't handle criticism. Their rebellious nature will eventually turn against you. The personalizer, they're super sensitive and take everything personally. You'll end up walking on eggshells around them, always feeling like you're in the wrong, even when you've done nothing wrong. The big talker, they may sound impressive at first, but once you get to know them, you'll realize they're just bragging about things they've never done and never will. The pampered prince or princess, these people act like spoiled children, making you feel guilty for not giving them everything they want. The savior, they'll always be there for you, fixing your problems and giving you everything you need, until you try to stand on your own 2 feet. Then you'll realize they were just trying to control you by making you dependent on them. Law number 4, the law of covetousness. Ever watch little kids play? It's pretty funny, if one of them picks up a toy, suddenly all the other kids want that exact toy too. And if you tell them they can have any toy they want except one, guess which one they'll throw a fit to get? From a young age, we all start wanting what we don't have or can't get. This behavior sticks with us as we grow up. We get what we want, and then almost immediately, we lose interest and start eyeing something else. Familiarity kills excitement faster than anything else, whether it's with objects or even relationships. Humans are wired to covet, but the trick is learning how to use that in a way that benefits you. Here are 3 ways to do that. Tip number 1, figure out what you really want. Look at your desires and figure out which ones are helpful and which ones are just you following the crowd. Don't let yourself get tricked into wanting something just because everyone else does. Take fame, for example. Lots of people want it, but are they ready for the loss of privacy and freedom that comes with it? Tip number 2, enjoy what you've got. Take a good look at your life and appreciate the good things. Being more in tune with your reality helps you focus on changing only what truly needs to be changed, instead of constantly chasing after the next big thing. Tip number 3, become the thing others desire. Honesty and being yourself are great qualities, but if you overdo it, you can become predictable and boring. People's attention will drift to someone else. Instead of always going after what you want, tap into what others are dreaming about and position yourself as what they desire. It's not about being fake, it's about being strategic. Start by looking at yourself from the outside. How do people see you and your work? Once you know, you can shape how you're perceived and present the image you want others to have. Sometimes it's smart to add a little mystery or secrecy to your image because it piques curiosity and makes you more interesting. Don't always be available, and create the impression that everyone wants a piece of what you're offering. Just like kids fighting over a toy, people will want what they think others want too. Law number 5, the law of repression. Ever had a thought so bad that it shocked you, like wow, did I really just think that? If you say you've never had those thoughts, I'd say it's because you're repressing your shadow side. Your shadow is the part of you that you try to hide, even from yourself. It's where your deepest insecurities, darkest secrets, aggressive impulses, and selfish desires live. Sometimes, when you're stressed or anxious, bits of this shadow side sneak out. That's when you might act out of character or have an emotional outburst. Most of us try to keep our shadow buried deep down, but that's not the best approach. The more you try to deny it, the stronger it becomes. This happens in society too. The more a culture tries to suppress certain behaviors or desires, the more people are drawn to them. That's why stories about serial killers, evil villains, and extreme violence are so popular. People who always try to project an image of perfection come across as fake because they're hiding part of who they are. We're more drawn to people who accept their flaws because we can all relate to imperfection. Here's how to deal with your shadow. See the shadow. Look at the part of yourself that you show to the world. Are you always cheerful and upbeat? Always calm and patient? There might be an opposite side you're hiding. If you've been overly sensitive or aggressive, think about what triggered those reactions to get a better understanding of yourself. Embrace the shadow. Once you identify the parts of you that are hidden, don't ignore them. Admitting your flaws makes you more relatable and likable. Explore the shadow. Play around with those thoughts and feelings you've kept hidden and use that energy in your work or hobbies, especially if they're creative. Show the shadow. Allow yourself to be a little more assertive, indifferent, weird, or selfish. You'll notice that a lot of successful people are eccentric or unconventional. That's because embracing their shadows gives them an edge and makes them stand out. Law number 6, the law of narcissism. Carl thought Mabel was his best friend. They were always hanging out, doing all the things Mabel loved. But one day, Carl got some bad news. A family member had passed away, and he was really shaken up. Mabel, trying to cheer him up, bought them movie tickets. But Carl was too upset and told her he'd rather stay home. Mabel didn't respond to his texts for a whole week after that. Carl started to worry, and then Mabel finally texted him back, saying she couldn't pay her electricity bill because she spent all her money on those movie tickets, and he didn't even go with her. Carl felt terrible, apologized, and even offered to pay her bill. But here's the thing, Mabel is what we call a deep narcissist. She was used to having control over Carl and getting all his attention. When he decided to do something for himself instead of going along with what she wanted, Mabel found a way to make him pay for it. She gave him the silent treatment. She completely ignored how he was feeling and took his refusal to go to the movies as a personal slight. So, she made sure he felt guilty about it and did something to make it up to her. People like Mabel feel like they're in danger if they're not getting constant love and attention from others. They'll do whatever it takes to keep that attention on them, and they're so good at manipulating that you might not even notice what they're doing, just like Carl didn't. Now, let's be real, you and I aren't so different from Mabel. We all have a bit of narcissism in us. We're usually caught up in our own goals and emotions, always craving some recognition or appreciation from others. But here's the thing, most of us can do something Mabel can't. We can give ourselves the love and attention we need. That means we're not constantly chasing after other people's approval like she is. The opposite of being a narcissist is empathy. Empathy is when you stop thinking about yourself for a second and start focusing on others. The more empathy you have, the healthier you'll be, emotionally, at least. Empathetic people bounce back quicker when they get hurt, don't take things too personally, and can even laugh at themselves. Plus, they get people better and can build stronger, healthier relationships. Law number 7, the law of irrationality. Let's talk about Katie and Jen, who work together. They're not BFFs, but they get along well enough. Or at least, they did until last week, when Jen blew up at Katie for making a small mistake on her report. Jen snapped, "I'm always fixing your mistakes. Can't you get it right just once?" Now Katie's feeling hurt because she thinks Jen overreacted to something minor. Jen, on the other hand, knows she was too harsh, but she was just so fed up. She also doesn't want to admit that her anger had more to do with her messy divorce than Katie's report. Sound familiar? Maybe you've been on either side of a situation like this. Someone loses it, and you're left dealing with the fallout, or maybe you're the one who blew up. This happens because, as much as we'd like to think we're rational beings, we can't think logically all the time. Sometimes, our emotions take the wheel, and we end up making bad choices. But emotions aren't bad. They're actually pretty essential. The issue is that our emotions operate on a very basic rule: avoid pain and seek pleasure. So even if we know what the right thing to do is, it's hard to actually do it if it's gonna hurt. We start making excuses, which is why most people never admit they're wrong or change their minds. It's just too painful. The downside of being irrational can be pretty serious, so here are 4 tips to help you stay more level-headed. Tip number 1, own your irrational side. People who think they're always rational believe they're right all the time. But that just means they're reacting based on a twisted view of their emotions, events, and the people around them. Tip number 2, analyze your reactions. By taking a closer look at how you behave, you slowly start to understand yourself better. This self-awareness will help your rational mind take over when you're in similar situations in the future. Tip number 3, slow down your reactions. Ever come up with the perfect comeback after the argument is over and you've calmed down? Taking a break from the situation and giving yourself time to cool off can help you get back in touch with your rational side. Remember, your true self shows up when you're under pressure. This is the best time to see who other people really are too. Tip number 4, embrace the pain. We need to work on raising our pain tolerance. It's okay to be wrong, to feel hurt, to feel guilty. When you accept your feelings, whether they're pleasant or uncomfortable, they'll have less control over you. Law number 8, the law of short-sightedness. This law is what trips you up when you're trying to stick to a diet, build good habits, or break bad ones. If we could always keep our long-term goals in mind, it would be easy to avoid that slice of chocolate cake because we'd always remember it's bad for our health. But let's be real, when that cake is sitting right in front of you, who's thinking about long-term health? Most people react to what's happening right now and forget that things are temporary and have consequences. It's like being at the base of a mountain, surrounded by trees, unable to see much of anything. But as you climb higher, your view expands. By the time you reach the top, you can see the whole picture better than anyone else. So, how do you climb that mountain and get the big picture? Here are 4 tips. Tip number 1, back in the 19th century, officials in Delhi thought there were too many poisonous snakes slithering around, so they offered a reward for every dead snake people brought in. Some folks decided to get clever and started breeding snakes just to kill them and cash in on the reward. When the authorities figured this out, they scrapped the reward program, but now people had all these snakes with nothing to do with them, so they let them go. The result? Even more snakes in Delhi than before. Sometimes, our actions have consequences we didn't see coming. To avoid this, try to think ahead about what could happen if you take a certain action. Even if it seems obvious, ask yourself how you can handle the possible outcomes. Tip number 2, sometimes, you get so wrapped up in a conflict that you can't bring yourself to walk away, even when you know you should. Take a step back and ask yourself, what are my real priorities? If I win this argument, will it help me reach my goals? Some battles just aren't worth fighting. Tip number 3, when you order something online, you want it to arrive ASAP, right? The longer you wait, the more impatient you get. We need to work on our patience and focus on long-term goals if we want to be successful. Tip number 4. We're drowning in information these days, and with so much coming at us, it's hard to see the big picture. Train your mind to filter out the noise and focus on what's really important based on your priorities and goals. Law number 9. The law of defensiveness. To explain this law, there's this story about a rebellious teenager who got caught red-handed selling drugs at school. He was suspended right away, but he still had to do his homework. Obviously, he didn't want to study, so his mom came up with an idea. She told him, "The principal doesn't want you in class because he thinks you're going to fail. He doesn't believe students can learn from home. Imagine how mad he'd be if you proved him wrong." And just like that, the kid suddenly had more motivation to study than ever before, all because he wanted to prove the principal wrong. We all like to believe we have these 3 qualities. 1. Autonomy. We like to think we make our own decisions and aren't easily influenced by others. We'll even rebel if we feel someone's trying to push us in a certain direction. 2. Intelligence. Most of us know we're not geniuses, but we still believe we have our own brand of smarts. 3. Goodness. We see ourselves as good people who stand up for what's right. The first step to being a master persuader is to avoid putting someone in a situation that challenges one of these 3 beliefs. Work within their self-image, even if it's not accurate or positive. Be empathetic and acknowledge their beliefs before you try to convince them of something. Let them think they're the ones persuading you. They'll feel superior, which is exactly what you want because then they'll be more open to your ideas. Strategy number 2, be a deep listener. Listen more than you talk. Respond to what they say with something that makes them feel understood and encourages them to keep talking about what they care about. Just don't be too obvious about it, or they'll get defensive if it feels more like an interview than a conversation. Strategy number 3, make them feel safe. When people believe they're accepted and loved just as they are, they're less likely to get defensive. Think about how you feel when you're with close friends. Your goal is to create that same sense of safety with others. Strategy number 4, ease their insecurities. We tend to like people who make us feel good about ourselves. So figure out what makes someone insecure and avoid triggering those insecurities. When someone asks for your opinion, they don't want the cold, hard truth, but they also don't want to hear lies. What they're really looking for is validation and a gentle confirmation of their opinion, delivered in a realistic and kind way. Strategy number 5, use their resistance and stubbornness to your advantage. Some people are especially resistant because they feel like the world is against them, so they need to fight back. Your job is to turn that resistance and stubbornness back on them, just like the mom did with her rebellious son. Law number 10, the law of self-sabotage. Let's imagine 2 people, Marcus and Lydia, both take a trip to Paris. Marcus arrives and immediately finds Paris a bit underwhelming. The language barrier frustrates him, so he avoids talking to people because he hates the idea of embarrassing himself. The beautiful scenes he saw in pictures don't match up to the reality because everywhere he goes, it's crowded with tourists. He feels lonely and uncomfortable. By the time he heads home, Marcus is telling everyone that Paris is overrated and not worth visiting. Lydia, on the other hand, is loving every minute of it. Her French isn't great, but she's eager to meet new people anyway. Sure, some folks laugh at her attempts, but she just laughs along and keeps trying. She ends up making friends who give her insider tips on the best times to visit tourist spots to avoid the crowds and take amazing photos. Lydia's already planning her next trip back to Paris. As you can see, 2 people can have the same experience, but their attitudes and perspectives completely change how they feel about it. Some people, like Marcus, have a negative and narrow mindset. They're overly cautious, afraid of losing control, and always expect the worst. Others, like Lydia, stay open to new ideas and usually end up with more positive experiences. Here are a few attitudes that can help you embrace a more expansive mindset. Attitude number 1, swap out certainty for curiosity. See yourself as a fearless, open-minded explorer. Instead of thinking you know everything, approach situations with the attitude of what can I learn here? Attitude number 2, don't dodge frustration and obstacles at all costs. You can't avoid challenges, but you can control how you respond to them. See negative events as chances to learn and grow stronger. Attitude number 3, don't jump on the bandwagon of indifference and skepticism that's so popular these days. Some folks see positive people as naive, but often, their negativity is just a front to hide their own fears. Attitude number 4, don't take things too personally. Most of the time, people's reactions towards you aren't really about you, it's more about what's going on with them. Attitude number 5, don't put limits on yourself. Your body and mind can handle more than you think. When I was in college, I'd often get sick before a big test or presentation. That happens because negative feelings like stress or anxiety can actually make us physically weaker. But when we're more positive, our health tends to improve. Law number 11, the law of grandiosity. We've all had big dreams, especially as kids. Maybe you dreamed of being the biggest rock star, writing a best-selling novel, saving endangered species, or running the most successful business ever. We all want to feel important and have a good opinion of ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. Having grand dreams can motivate us and give us the drive to achieve our goals. But the problem starts when those grand feelings get out of hand and distort our sense of reality. We might start to believe we're way more important or skilled than we actually are, and that can make us lose touch with what's real. To avoid falling into that trap, it's important to channel that grand energy into our work, goals, and decisions, not our egos. Here's how you can do that and still feel fulfilled. Tip number 1, be honest with yourself. We all have ambitions and want to feel special. But what is it that you really want, and is it something you can actually achieve? Tip number 2, instead of bouncing from one grand idea to the next, pick one reasonable goal and focus on it. Take things one step at a time. Tip number 3, your ideas aren't going to be perfect. Seek feedback from others and seriously consider their opinions. Tip number 4, choose projects that are just slightly above your current skill level. If they're too easy, you won't grow. If they're too hard, you'll end up frustrated and might give up when reality hits. Tip number 5, once you've got your grandiosity under control, let it loose now and then by challenging yourself with a bigger goal. Law number 12, the law of gender rigidity. In many ancient cultures, like those of the Persians and Egyptians, people believed that humans were originally both male and female. According to the myth, this made humans so powerful that the gods felt threatened and split them in half, creating separate male and female beings. Robert Greene argues that we all have both masculine and feminine traits, but as we grow up, we tend to over-identify with one or the other, influenced by our genetics and how our parents raised us. In doing so, we end up repressing the other side, and in the process, we lose important aspects of our character and personality. Take, for example, someone who believes rationality is exclusively a masculine trait. They might belittle emotional men, saying things like boys don't cry, even though research shows that men can be just as, if not more, emotional than women. We need to become comfortable with both our masculine and feminine sides and strive for balance. When we bridge that gap internally, our relationships with others improve because we feel more connected to everyone, regardless of gender. To make progress, both personally and as a society, we should stop trying to fit into rigid gender roles. Don't feel pressured to conform to what's expected of your gender, and don't impose those expectations on others, especially children. Instead, create a role that fits who you are, regardless of gender traits. Look inside yourself, recognize the masculine or feminine qualities you've neglected, and work on reconnecting with them. This will help you become more creative, authentic, and independent. Law number 13, the law of aimlessness. You've probably heard stories about people who reach their goal of getting rich, only to feel lost afterward. They thought the money would fill a gap in their lives, but it didn't. We hear countless stories, some tragic, about people who are rich, famous, and successful but still unhappy. This happens because things like money and fame don't have much meaning if they're not tied to a higher purpose. Without a sense of purpose, your goals won't bring you the fulfillment you expect. Instead, once you achieve them, you'll quickly replace them with new, equally meaningless goals, leaving you feeling lost and wondering, I got what I wanted, so why am I not happy? What have I been doing with my life? Here are a few strategies to help you find a higher sense of purpose, discover your calling in life. Look back at the things you've enjoyed since you were a child, the activities that felt natural, easy, and fun. Is there something you love so much that you do it for free? Your calling might be at the intersection of different fields, like technology and design or literature and philosophy. Embrace people's negative opinions. Most people shy away from situations where they might face criticism or failure. But you don't need to do that. Accept negative experiences, limitations, and even suffering as opportunities to learn. Use other people's negative opinions to fuel your motivation and strengthen your sense of purpose. Absorb purposeful energy. We're all influenced by the moods and energy of the people around us. Surround yourself with people who have a strong sense of purpose. They'll inspire you to be your best self. Create a ladder of descending goals. Long-term goals are great for giving you clarity and determination. They're ambitious and motivating, but they can also make you anxious. To manage that, create a ladder of smaller, more achievable goals that lead to your bigger one. These smaller goals will give you a sense of satisfaction and keep you connected to your sense of purpose. Law number 14, the law of conformity. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that's still well known today. He showed participants a line and then 3 more lines, asking them to pick which of the 3 matched the first one. When asked individually, most participants chose the correct line. But when asked in a group where everyone else deliberately chose the wrong line, around 75% of the participants went along with the group, even though they knew the answer was wrong. This experiment highlights how powerful conformity can be in our lives. The way we dress, the food we eat, and the brands we buy are all heavily influenced by the people around us. It's not that we're naive or easily manipulated, it's that we all have a deep need to belong, whether it's to a small group like our friends or a larger one like our country. The problem is, to fit in, we're often willing to ignore our rational side, which makes us more likely to take unnecessary risks. Since we can't avoid conformity, we need to figure out what triggers this response in us so that we can still belong and cooperate while maintaining our independence and rationality. Here's what Robert Greene suggests: create a reality group. The idea is to harness this social force for something positive, to work together to create something great. Here's how. Tip number 1. Focus on the ideas, not the people who have them, and make sure your group does the same. Tip number 2. Establish a clear, positive mission that unites your group. Make sure everyone knows where you're headed. Tip number 3. Use your mental energy for the important stuff and don't be afraid to delegate tasks to people you trust. Tip number 4. Encourage open communication and let ideas flow freely. The more information you have, the better your decisions will be. Tip number 5. Remember that people pick up on your emotions, especially if you're the leader. Make sure you're bringing the right vibes, confidence, calmness, and determination. Law number 15. The law of fickleness. People are funny about leadership. We want someone to guide us, but we also want to make our own choices. We want to be protected, but we also crave freedom. As a leader, you have to be prepared for the fact that people will turn on you as soon as you slip up. So here are 6 strategies to help you lead better and establish authority. Authenticity. The authority you want to build has to come naturally from who you are. There are lots of ways to be a leader, so just be yourself. Attitude. Be a good listener. Focus on helping and serving others instead of just looking out for yourself. And remember, leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege. Vision. In tough times, be the one who can see past the fear and stress and bring everyone back to what really matters. Tone. Work as hard or harder than your team. Lead by example, and people will naturally want to step up to your level. Taboo. Give more than you take. If you take too much, you'll create insecurity, and people will start questioning your authority. Adaptability. As you gain confidence and respect, your authority grows. But over time, people might start seeing you as old-fashioned. Keep adapting your leadership style to stay relevant. Law number 16. The law of aggression. Aggression has always been a way for us to protect ourselves from danger and fight for what we need, like food and shelter. These days, we don't have to hunt or defend a cave, but our aggressive instincts are still there, lurking under the surface. When we feel insecure or threatened, that aggression can come out, leading us to say or do things we later regret. Here are some tips for dealing with aggression. Tip number 1. Recognize your patterns. Figure out where you're channeling your aggression so you can consciously change it. Tip number 2, don't bottle it up. Aggression is like pressure, if you don't let it out, it'll explode and hurt you or others. Tip number 3, own your ambitions and use them to push yourself to grow. Tip number 4, ignore self-doubt and keep going. Tip number 5, focus your aggression on solving problems, not on the people involved. It doesn't matter if you think they deserve it or not. Law number 17, the law of generational myopia. One thing that always fascinated me about the stories my parents and grandparents told is how clearly defined and rigid social roles were back in the day. There were strict rules about what people were expected to do, and no one really questioned them. Things are different now. Families and societies are more fluid, and we deal with differences in ways that would have been unimaginable back then. Every generation is shaped by a mix of their parents' beliefs and their own desire to break away from the previous generation. This mix creates what we call the spirit of the times, a collection of tastes, beliefs, struggles, and ways of thinking that define an era. You're just as influenced by this spirit as anyone else. We're all products of our time. Understanding how your generation's spirit affects you can help you break free from the limitations it imposes. If you can tap into what your generation is searching for and give it a voice, your work is more likely to resonate with others. Here are 5 strategies to make that happen. Challenge your past. Maybe you want to create something new, but you're held back by the values you were raised with. It's normal to hesitate, but don't be afraid to challenge the taboos of your generation. Adapt the past to the present. The frustrations your generation faces have likely been felt by past generations too. Look at who the leaders were back then and what they did. Adapt some of their styles and symbols to your current reality. Reconnect with the spirit of childhood. By tapping into the spirit of your childhood, you can connect with others who share those memories, making your generational peers more likely to follow you. Subvert the spirit. If you're in conflict with some aspect of your generation's spirit, be creative and find a subtle way to deviate from it instead of outright fighting it. Keep adapting. As we get older, we tend to get stuck in our ways. Improve your flexibility by surrounding yourself with people from different generations. By paying attention to their values, ideas, and perspectives, you can broaden your own. Law number 18, the law of death denial. Have you ever had months to work on a school project and ended up cramming in the last week, or even the last day? You put it off, only feeling motivated to get it done as the deadline loomed. That's a lot like how we deal with death. We all know we're going to die someday, but the thought makes us so anxious that we try to ignore it as much as possible. But by denying death, we act like we don't have a deadline, and we end up putting things off. Instead of appreciating life, we waste our time as if we had all the time in the world. If you're 30 years old right now, you've probably got about 30 more really productive years left. After 60, most people don't have the energy or passion to do all the things they want to do. So realistically, you've got 30 productive years left. Of those 30 years, you'll spend 8 years sleeping. Another 2 years will be spent commuting, whether it's going to work, visiting friends, or traveling. You'll spend around 3 years taking care of yourself, showering, cleaning, etc. Let's say you'll spend another 2 years on entertainment and fun. When you subtract all that from your 30 years, you're left with about 15 years of really productive time to do what you want. 15 years isn't much time. It feels like just yesterday that we entered 2021, and now we're already in 2023. Just like that, the years fly by. Life is short, and remembering that you'll die someday can help you prioritize what really matters. We'll live fuller lives if we stay connected to the reality of death. Think of your remaining years as your deadline and use that as motivation to work on what's important to you and to experience all the amazing things life has to offer before your time is up. If you're into this kind of book summary, check out the video on the screen. It's a summary of another book called The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. Thanks for watching.